I never imagined my 45 years of marriage would end with divorce papers thrust into my hands just hours after my own son Michael told me I needed to vacate the guest house for his wife's parents. But what Richard and Michael didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment for 25 years. Every property, business, and account they treasured was legally mine. Their shocked faces when they discovered the truth was just the beginning of my reclamation story. Subscribe now to hear how I turned their betrayal into my liberation, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I met Richard in 1978 during my sophomore year at the University of Michigan. I was studying accounting, and he was finishing his business degree with dreams of becoming a real estate developer. He was charming, ambitious, and looked at me like I was the center of his universe. After a whirlwind romance of just 8 months, we married in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. I was 23 and Richard was 25. The early years were beautiful but challenging. Richard needed to get his MBA to pursue his business dreams, so I took a full-time accounting position at a local firm to support us financially. I would work all day, then come home to cook dinner and help Richard study. We lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, saving every penny toward our future. I believed in him completely. 3 years later, after Richard graduated with his MBA, we were blessed with our son, Michael. I can still remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, his eyes so much like his father's. Richard was already working for a small development company, trying to make connections and learn the business. The hours were long and the pay was modest, but we were building towards something. I reduced my work hours to part-time so I could be home with Michael. It wasn't an easy decision, but Richard insisted it was best for our son. "You can always go back to accounting later," he said. "These years with Michael won't come again." I knew he was right, but I also made sure to keep my skills sharp by doing freelance bookkeeping from home while Michael napped. By the time Michael started kindergarten, Richard's career was taking off. He had partnered with 2 investors to purchase and renovate a small apartment building. The project was successful, and it led to bigger opportunities. Soon, Richard was founding his own development company, Stratford Properties, named after the street where we bought our first real home. As Richard's business grew, so did my role in it. I managed the bookkeeping for all the properties, organized files, handled tenant issues, and hosted dinner parties for potential investors, all while maintaining our home and being Michael's primary caregiver. Richard would often introduce me as the secret weapon behind Stratford's success, but as the years passed, those acknowledgments became less frequent. Michael grew into a bright, competitive boy who idolized his father. He wanted to be just like Richard, wearing little suits to business meetings at the dining room table. Richard encouraged this, taking Michael to construction sites from the time he was 10, teaching him to see properties as investments rather than homes. I continued my education quietly, taking night classes to complete my accounting degree when Michael was in middle school. Richard was too busy to notice, assuming I was at book club or with friends. I became licensed as a CPA when Michael was 16, but I never made a big announcement about it. Something told me to keep certain accomplishments to myself. When Michael went to college, also for business like his father, I hoped to increase my role in the company officially. But Richard had already hired several younger men for positions I could have filled. "You're so valuable handling things behind the scenes," he would say. "Why complicate that with titles and offices?" I accepted this explanation at the time, though it stung. Michael met Amanda during his senior year of college. She came from a family that valued status and wealth above all else. Her father Robert was a surgeon, and her mother Patricia never let anyone forget it. From the first time I met them at Michael and Amanda's graduation dinner, I sensed they saw me as somehow less than them, despite the fact that Richard's business was now worth millions. After Michael joined his father's company, Richard and I bought a larger home with a lovely guest house on the property. I often thought it would be perfect for aging parents or visiting friends. Never did I imagine it would become my own residence. As Michael and Amanda's relationship progressed toward marriage, I noticed changes in my son. He became more focused on appearances, more dismissive of people he deemed unimportant. Amanda encouraged this, always pushing for more, bigger, better. Their wedding was an extravagant affair that cost more than our first house. During the planning, Amanda often overruled my suggestions, saying they were too traditional or not elegant enough. By our 40th anniversary, Richard and I were living separate lives under one roof. He was consumed by business, golf, and socializing with younger colleagues. I maintained the household, managed the personal finances, and tried to keep our marriage alive. For our anniversary, I planned a special dinner at home. Richard came 3 hours late, ate quickly, and left to take a business call. He gave me a diamond bracelet that still had the gift receipt in the bag, showing it had been purchased that same day. 2 years ago, Richard suggested I move into the guest house. "You'll have your own space," he said. "You're always complaining about my late nights disturbing your sleep." I hadn't complained, not once, but I recognized the opportunity for what it was. The guest house became my sanctuary, filled with books, my art supplies, and peace. It was the first space that was truly mine in decades. I had no idea that sanctuary was already being eyed by others, or that my husband was making plans that didn't include me at all. The changes in Richard happened so gradually that for years I could pretend not to notice. Business dinners that ran later and later. Weekend golf trips that extended from 2 days to 4. The password on his phone that hadn't existed before. Small withdrawals from our joint account that added up to significant amounts over time. I remember the first time I found a receipt for dinner at Giovanni's, our favorite restaurant, on a night Richard had told me he was having a business meeting at the steakhouse across town. It was tucked in his suit jacket pocket when I was gathering clothes for the dry cleaner. 2 entrees, a bottle of expensive wine, and dessert to share. I placed it back exactly where I found it and said nothing. Michael was changing too, mirroring his father more each day. The kind, thoughtful boy who once picked wildflowers for me was now a man who checked his watch impatiently when I spoke. He had his father's ambition but none of the charm Richard had shown in our early years. Success was Michael's only goal, and Amanda made sure he stayed focused on it. Amanda came from wealth, but it was never enough. Her family had a beautiful home in Bloomfield Hills, but she wanted a bigger one. Her father Robert drove a Mercedes, but it wasn't the latest model. Her mother Patricia took luxury cruises but complained about the size of the suites. Nothing satisfied them, and their dissatisfaction was contagious. After Michael and Amanda married, her parents became regular visitors to our home. Each visit was an exercise in patience. Patricia would run her finger along shelves checking for dust, rearrange my kitchen cabinets without asking, and make comments about how quaint our decorations were. Robert would corner Richard to discuss investment opportunities or brag about patients who were famous athletes or local celebrities. Then came the bank statements. I had always handled our personal accounts, but Richard kept the business finances separate. One day, a statement for a business account was mistakenly mailed to our home address rather than the office. Before returning it to Richard, I glanced at the transactions. There were regular transfers, tens of thousands of dollars, to an LLC I'd never heard of. When I casually mentioned receiving the statement, Richard became uncharacteristically angry, accusing me of snooping. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for tea and overheard Richard on the phone in his study. "We need to accelerate the timeline," he was saying. "Michael agrees it's time to restructure the assets." There was a pause. She doesn't need to know until everything's in place. The next week, while hosting Sunday dinner, I noticed Michael and Richard exchange looks when Amanda brought up her parents' upcoming anniversary. "They've been married 30 years, she said proudly. "Daddy's planning a surprise trip to Italy." "That's wonderful," I said. "Your mother will love Italy. The guest house will be here if they need somewhere to stay when they return while their alarm system is being upgraded." Amanda had mentioned the security installation the previous week. "Actually," Michael said, glancing at his father again, "I was thinking they might stay in the guest house for a while after their trip. Their contractor says the renovation on their master bathroom will take at least 6 weeks, and you know how Mom is about dust and noise." I felt a chill run through me. The guest house? But that's where I live now. Amanda laughed as if I'd made a joke. "Oh, Evelyn, it's not like it's really your house. It's just a place you're using temporarily. Mom and Daddy would be much more comfortable there than in some hotel." Before I could respond, Richard changed the subject, asking Michael about a new property they were considering. The conversation moved on, but the message was clear. My space was not my own, and my opinions were not considered important. That night I called my old college friend Marjorie. We had reconnected at our 30-year reunion, and she had become my confidant over the past decade. Marjorie had gone through a difficult divorce years earlier, and had rebuilt her life beautifully. "It's getting worse," I told her. "I think they're planning something, and it involves moving me out of the guest house." "Have you contacted Catherine?" Marjorie asked. Catherine was the attorney she had introduced me to 25 years ago, after I discovered Richard's first affair. "Not yet. I'm gathering more information first." "Don't wait too long," Marjorie warned. "Men like Richard don't make moves unless everything is already in place." Over the next few weeks I noticed Amanda visiting more frequently, often when Richard was home but I was out. Twice I returned early from errands to find her car in the driveway. Each time, she and Richard would be in his study with the door closed, conversation stopping abruptly when I announced my presence. Amanda's parents began dropping by unannounced to see the guest house. Patricia would walk through my space making comments like, "This wall would look better with our antique mirror," or "We'll need to replace these curtains." When I mentioned these visits to Richard, he dismissed my concerns. "They're just being friendly, Evelyn. Don't be so sensitive." At the company's annual summer barbecue, I overheard a conversation between Richard's assistant Julie and one of the property managers. "So is she completely in the dark?" the manager asked. Julie replied, "Completely. Richard says she'll get the minimum required by law, and she'll probably be grateful for that." I maintained my smile and continued serving dessert, but inside a switch flipped. The last threads of hope that I was misinterpreting things were gone. That night I emailed Catherine and asked for an urgent appointment. For 25 years, I had been preparing for this moment, ever since I found lipstick on Richard's collar and evidence of a weekend in Chicago with his then assistant. Instead of confronting him immediately, I had taken Marjorie's advice and met with Catherine first. "Knowledge is power," Catherine had told me, "and documentation is everything." Since then, I had maintained meticulous records of every property purchase, every business decision in which I had participated, every contribution I had made to building Stratford properties. I had copies of documents showing how properties had been placed in my name for tax advantages Richard had thought were temporary. I had recordings of meetings where Richard acknowledged my role in securing investors or managing properties. All of this evidence was stored in a climate-controlled storage unit rented under my maiden name, with backup copies in a safe deposit box at a bank Richard didn't use. I had been building my case quietly, systematically, for decades, hoping I would never need it but prepared if I did. Now, as I watched Richard and Michael whispering by the grill, Amanda showing Patricia photos on her phone that made them both look toward the guest house, I knew the time for preparation was over. The storm was coming, and I needed to be ready. The day Michael came to tell me I needed to move out of the guest house was deceptively beautiful. Early October in Michigan brings a special kind of light, golden and warm, making the changing leaves look like they're glowing from within. I was in my small garden, cutting the last of the season's roses to dry, when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel path. Michael's black BMW pulled up, and I felt a moment of pleasure at seeing my son on a weekday morning. That pleasure faded when I saw his face as he got out of the car. He had his business expression on, the one he used when terminating employees or delivering bad news to contractors. "Mom," he said, not bothering with a hug or kiss on the cheek, "do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "No, this won't take long." We sat at the small table on my patio, the one where I had imagined us having many family breakfasts, perhaps someday with grandchildren. Michael didn't meet my eyes, instead looking at the carefully rehearsed speech he was clearly running through in his mind. "Mom, I need to discuss something important with you." He cleared his throat. "As you know, Amanda's parents have been wanting to downsize from their house. The maintenance is becoming too much for them." This was news to me. Robert and Patricia had never mentioned downsizing. In fact, Patricia had recently complained that their home theater wasn't large enough for Robert's new projection system. "They've been looking at retirement communities," Michael continued, "but nothing feels right to them." Then Amanda had the idea that they might use this guest house. It would be perfect for them. 2 bedrooms, that nice open living area, and close to us so they can see their future grandchildren regularly. My heart sank. There it was, laid out so matter-of-factly. My home, the one space that had become truly mine, was being given away. And the casual mention of future grandchildren I would apparently not be close enough to see regularly, felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. I see, I said, keeping my voice steady. And where am I supposed to live, Michael? He had the grace to look uncomfortable for a moment. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Dad agrees it makes sense for Robert and Patricia to use this space. They're younger, more active. They need it more. Younger than me, you mean? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Mom, don't be like that. You know what I mean. They're at a stage of life where they want to be involved with family. And with Dad restructuring the company, bringing me in as a full partner, it makes sense for them to be close. Robert's connections could really help us expand into the medical office market. So this is a business decision, I said. It's a family decision, Michael insisted. A practical one. Look, I've researched some really nice retirement communities. There's one called Sunshine Meadows that has activities, outings, people your age. As he spoke, images flashed through my mind. Michael at 6, crying over a scraped knee. Only my kisses making it better. At 12, his face glowing with pride as I sat in the front row of his debate competition. At 18, his arms around me as he left for college, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Mom." Where had that boy gone? When had he become this man who could sit across from me and tell me I was disposable? Sunshine Meadows, I repeated. You want to put me in a retirement home. It's not putting you anywhere, Mom. It's a nice community. I thought you'd be happy. You're always saying you want to make new friends, take art classes. I have friends, Michael. I take art classes at the community center. I have a life here. But is it really a life, Mom? You're rattling around in this guest house while Dad's in the main house. You barely see each other. Wouldn't you rather be somewhere with people, activities, care if you need it? Care if I need it? I'm 68, not 98. I don't need care. Michael sighed, his patience wearing thin. Look, Mom, this is happening. Dad supports it. It's the best solution for everyone. Your isolation here isn't healthy. And frankly, this property is part of my inheritance eventually. I need to protect that. There it was. The truth. This wasn't about what was best for me, or even what was best for Amanda's parents. This was about money and assets and what Michael believed he was entitled to. How long do I have? I asked, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Michael looked relieved that I wasn't fighting him. Well, Robert and Patricia get back from Italy in 3 weeks. Ideally, you'd be out by then. 3 weeks to pack up my life. How generous. My sarcasm was lost on him. I can help you find movers. Sunshine Meadows has availability starting next month. I can front the deposit if that helps. I'll need at least 2 weeks to sort through everything, I said, thinking quickly. Some of these things belong to my family, not to Richard's. Sure, take 2 weeks. That still gives us a week to clean and set up for Robert and Patricia. He checked his watch. I've got to get to a meeting. Are we good here, Mom? Are we good here, Mom? As if he'd asked to borrow my car. Not told me I was being evicted from my home. We're fine, Michael. I understand perfectly. He stood, hesitated as if considering whether to hug me, then thought better of it. I'll text you some links to Sunshine Meadows and a couple other places. Their amenities are really great, Mom. You might end up loving it there. I watched him walk to his car, my son who no longer saw me. As he drove away, I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Then I dried my eyes, went inside, and made a phone call to Catherine. The timeline had accelerated, and I needed to be ready. Richard arrived at the guest house 4 hours after Michael left. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden I had so carefully tended. I was sitting at my small desk, making notes about what I would need to take with me and what could be left behind, when I heard his distinctive knock. 3 sharp raps, just as he'd done on my apartment door all those years ago when we were dating. I opened the door to find him standing there in his business suit, silver hair perfectly styled, holding a manila envelope. His face was set in what I had come to think of as his closing the deal expression, confident and slightly condescending. "Evelyn," he said with a nod. "May I come in?" "Of course, Richard. It's your house after all." I stepped aside to let him enter. He glanced around the space as if seeing it for the first time, noting the bookshelves, my painting supplies, the small collection of family photos. For a moment, something like uncertainty crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by determination. "I assume Michael spoke with you earlier," he said, remaining standing though I had gestured to the sofa. "Yes, he explained that I'm being evicted to make room for Robert and Patricia. Quite the son we raised." Richard frowned. "That's not fair, Evelyn. This isn't an eviction. It's a family decision that makes sense for everyone. Michael is the future of Stratford Properties. Robert's connections could be invaluable. So I've been told. What's in the envelope, Richard?" He looked down at his hand as if surprised to find the envelope still there. Yes. Well, this is related in a way." He held it out to me. "My attorney has prepared these papers. I think you'll find everything is in order." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "What kind of papers?" "Divorce papers, Evelyn. I think we both know our marriage has run its course. 45 years is a long time. People change. Needs change. This gives us both a chance to move on. 45 years. Nearly half a century of shared life, reduced to people change." I thought of the young man who had promised to love me forever, who had held my hand through 20 hours of labor when Michael was born, who had built his empire with my support every step of the way. "I see," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "And the timing? Just coincidence that you're serving me divorce papers the same day our son kicks me out of my home." Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable. "The timing isn't ideal, I admit. But with the company restructuring, bringing Michael in as full partner, it made sense to handle everything at once. Clean breaks are easier." "Clean for whom?" I asked. "For everyone. Look, Evelyn, I've had my attorney draw up a very fair settlement. You'll get the condo in Naples, a generous monthly allowance, and your car. More than enough to live very comfortably." I thought about our assets, the empire we had built together over 4 decades. The condo in Naples was the smallest of our 6 properties. The generous allowance would be a fraction of our actual worth. And Stratford Properties? The rental buildings on Elmwood? The commercial development downtown? The tech incubator space? Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Those are business assets, Evelyn. They're complicated. You wouldn't understand the legal structures, the tax implications. Trust me, what I'm offering is more than fair. Many women would be thrilled with such a settlement. Many women haven't spent 45 years building a business with their husband," I replied. "Building a business?" Richard laughed, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. "Evelyn, you kept the books in the early days and played hostess at dinner parties. That hardly constitutes building a business." I thought about the investors I had charmed when Richard's presentations fell flat. The tenant problems I had solved when managers couldn't. The properties I had identified that became our most profitable assets. The legal documents I had reviewed with my secretly acquired expertise, catching mistakes that would have cost us millions. "Is that what you really think?" I asked quietly. "It's the reality, Evelyn. I've worked with my attorney for months to ensure this agreement protects what I've built, while providing generously for you. All you need to do is sign." Months. He had been planning this for months, working with lawyers, probably hiding assets, all while smiling at me across the dinner table. I thought about the 40th anniversary dinner he had missed most of, the last-minute gift. Had he already been planning my disposal then? "I'll need to review these with my own attorney," I said. Richard frowned. "You don't have an attorney, Evelyn." "Actually, I do." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Since when?" "That's not important right now. What matters is that I'll need time to review these documents properly." "There's nothing to review. It's all standard language, very straightforward. My attorney assures me it's more than generous." "Your attorney works for you, Richard, not for me. I'll have my own representation review the offer and respond accordingly." Richard's confident expression faltered slightly. This wasn't following his script. "Evelyn, don't be difficult. This is happening whether you like it or not. Fighting it will only cost us both money and create unnecessary drama. Is that what you want after 45 years? I thought about the storage unit filled with evidence, about the offshore account I had been feeding with small amounts of hobby money for decades, about the copyright I held on the property management software Stratford used daily, developed by my cousin's company with my input. What I want, I said carefully, is what I've earned. Nothing more, nothing less. Richard sighed dramatically. Always so stubborn. This is why it's time to end things, Evelyn. You never could see the bigger picture. I need someone who understands my vision, who can be a true partner in this next phase. Someone younger, I assume? Age has nothing to do with it. Julie understands business. She's ambitious, forward-thinking. Julie, his executive assistant. Of course, the cliché was almost comforting in its predictability. I'm sure she is, I said. I'll have my attorney contact yours within the week. Don't drag this out, Evelyn. It won't change the outcome. The agreement is fair, and fighting it will only deplete what I'm offering you. I didn't answer, simply held the envelope and looked at him. This stranger wearing my husband's face. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Well, I have a dinner meeting. We can discuss this more when you've calmed down and had time to think rationally. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Evelyn? Michael mentioned Sunshine Meadows. I think it would be perfect for you. I've already spoken to them about availability. With that parting shot, he left, closing the door firmly behind him. I stood motionless for several minutes, the envelope heavy in my hands. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. Catherine? It's Evelyn. Richard just served me divorce papers. Yes, the same day. It's time to implement our plan. Everything. Yes, immediately. They have no idea what's coming. The moment Richard's car disappeared down the driveway, I was on the phone with Marjorie. It happened, I said when she answered. Both of them on the same day. Michael wants me out in 2 weeks for Amanda's parents, and Richard served me divorce papers 4 hours later. Those bastards, Marjorie breathed. Are you okay? I'm angry, not broken, I told her. And I'm ready. I've called Catherine. Good. Remember what we talked about. Don't confront them yet. Let them think they've won until everything is in place. After speaking with Marjorie, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the garden. As the twilight deepened, I thought back to 25 years ago, the day everything changed. Richard had been away at a developers conference in Chicago. I was sorting laundry when I found the receipt from the Peninsula Hotel tucked in his suit pocket. 2 guests. Champagne room service. A romantic dinner. The hotel was nowhere near the conference center listed on his itinerary. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, receipt in hand, wondering what to do. Confront him? Cry? Pretend I hadn't seen it? In that moment of painful clarity, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The trust was broken, but more than that, I understood Richard saw me as dispensable, replaceable. Instead of confrontation, I called Marjorie, who had recently divorced her unfaithful husband. Don't do anything yet, she advised. Get smart first. I'm sending you to my attorney, Catherine Davis. She specializes in high-asset divorces and protecting women like us. Catherine was a revelation. Smart, strategic, and utterly unsentimental about marriage and money. Men like your husband operate from a position of entitlement, she told me during our first meeting. They believe they've earned everything themselves, that their wives are just along for the ride. Your job now is to document every way that isn't true. I didn't file for divorce then. Richard apologized for the misunderstanding about his Chicago trip, and I pretended to believe him. But from that day forward, I began building my case meticulously and secretly. First, I documented my historical contributions. I created a timeline of every property purchase, noting my role in each transaction. I made copies of old checks showing my income going into business accounts. I gathered photographs of me at construction sites, at investor meetings, hosting business events. Next, I educated myself. I finished my accounting degree online while Richard thought I was taking art classes. I became licensed as a CPA. I took business law courses. I learned about real estate, property management, and investment strategies. Knowledge was indeed power. Then came the strategic positioning. When Richard suggested putting certain properties in my name for tax advantages, I enthusiastically agreed. When he wanted to copyright the property management software under my maiden name as a liability shield, I handled the paperwork myself. When he created LLCs for various holdings, I made sure my name was included in the key documents, often in ways Richard didn't fully understand or notice. All the while, I maintained the perfect facade of the supportive wife. I attended the dinner parties, charmed the investors, managed the household, and never ever let on that I was preparing for the day Richard would decide I was expendable. I opened a safe deposit box at a bank across town and began storing copies of crucial documents there. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit under my maiden name for additional records. I set up an offshore account and fed it slowly with money from my hobbies, selling crafts online and occasional consulting work that Richard knew nothing about. Catherine helped me identify the weak points in Richard's business structure, the places where my name on documents would matter most. It's not about taking everything, she advised. It's about positioning yourself so that fighting you would cost him more than settling fairly. Over the years, there were moments when I considered confronting Richard, demanding marriage counseling, or simply filing for divorce. But as Michael grew up, joined the business, and started his own family, I hesitated. I told myself I was protecting our son, preserving his inheritance, maintaining family harmony. The truth was more complicated. Part of me still loved the young man Richard had been. Part of me took pride in the empire we had built together. And part of me, the part one wasn't proud of, wanted to see Richard's face when he realized I had been 10 steps ahead of him all along. Catherine and I met quarterly to review my documentation and strategy. "You're building the most comprehensive case I've ever seen," she told me on our 20th anniversary of working together. "Most clients can't maintain this level of detail and patience." I had documented every business trip that extended mysteriously, every late-night meeting that smelled of another woman's perfume, every dismissive comment about my contributions, every time Richard took credit for my ideas. I had recordings of business discussions where Richard explicitly acknowledged my role in securing investors or managing properties, save because Michigan was a one-party consent state for recordings. I had built relationships with key tenants, vendors, and business partners, many of whom respected me more than they did Richard. I had quietly registered the copyright to the property management software that Stratford Properties used daily, ensuring that while the company had a perpetual license to use it, I owned the actual intellectual property, and I had waited, patiently, for 25 years. Now, sitting in my chair as darkness fell completely, I pulled out my phone and called Catherine again. "I need to meet first thing tomorrow," I said. "Bring everything. All of it." "All of it?" Catherine sounded surprised. "Evelyn, we've collected a lot over 25 years. "Yes, all of it." Richard gave me 2 weeks to get out of the guest house. "That's our timeline now." "I'll have everything ready," Catherine promised. "And Evelyn? After all these years of preparation, how does it feel to finally put the plan in motion?" I thought about Michael's dismissive tone, about Richard's condescending explanation of my generous settlement, about the decades of being underestimated and overlooked. "It feels like justice," I said. The next morning, I arrived at Catherine's office to find 3 large boxes of documents on her conference table. My life's work, in a sense. Not the family I had raised or the home I had created, but the evidence I had gathered, the protection I had built for myself against this very day. "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with the full counterstrike?" Catherine asked as we reviewed the key documents. "We could negotiate a more favorable settlement without revealing everything." "They planned this together, Catherine," I said. "My husband and my son conspired to discard me on the same day, to push me into a retirement home and divide my assets between them. No, I want them to understand exactly who they've been dealing with all these years." Catherine nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Then let's give them an education they'll never forget." The moment Richard's car disappeared down the driveway, I was on the phone with Marjorie. "It happened," I said when she answered. "Both of them on the same day." Michael wants me out in 2 weeks for Amanda's parents, and Richard served me divorce papers 4 hours later. Those bastards, Marjorie breathed. Are you okay? I'm angry, not broken, I told her. And I'm ready. I've called Catherine. Good. Remember what we talked about. Don't confront them yet. Let them think they've won until everything is in place. After speaking with Marjorie, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the garden. As the twilight deepened, I thought back to 25 years ago, the day everything changed. Richard had been away at a developers conference in Chicago. I was sorting laundry when I found the receipt from the Peninsula Hotel tucked in his suit pocket. 2 guests. Champagne room service. A romantic dinner. The hotel was nowhere near the conference center listed on his itinerary. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, receipt in hand, wondering what to do. Confront him? Cry? Pretend I hadn't seen it? In that moment of painful clarity, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The trust was broken, but more than that, I understood Richard saw me as dispensable, replaceable. Instead of confrontation, I called Marjorie, who had recently divorced her unfaithful husband. Don't do anything yet, she advised. Get smart first. I'm sending you to my attorney, Catherine Davis. She specializes in high-asset divorces and protecting women like us. Catherine was a revelation. Smart, strategic, and utterly unsentimental about marriage and money. Men like your husband operate from a position of entitlement, she told me during our first meeting. They believe they've earned everything themselves, that their wives are just along for the ride. Your job now is to document every way that isn't true. I didn't file for divorce then. Richard apologized for the misunderstanding about his Chicago trip, and I pretended to believe him. But from that day forward, I began building my case meticulously and secretly. First, I documented my historical contributions. I created a timeline of every property purchase, noting my role in each transaction. I made copies of old checks showing my income going into business accounts. I gathered photographs of me at construction sites, at investor meetings, hosting business events. Next, I educated myself. I finished my accounting degree online while Richard thought I was taking art classes. I became licensed as a CPA. I took business law courses. I learned about real estate, property management, and investment strategies. Knowledge was indeed power. Then came the strategic positioning. When Richard suggested putting certain properties in my name for tax advantages, I enthusiastically agreed. When he wanted to copyright the property management software under my maiden name as a liability shield, I handled the paperwork myself. When he created LLCs for various holdings, I made sure my name was included in the key documents, often in ways Richard didn't fully understand or notice. All the while, I maintained the perfect facade of the supportive wife. I attended the dinner parties, charmed the investors, managed the household, and never ever let on that I was preparing for the day Richard would decide I was expendable. I opened a safe deposit box at a bank across town and began storing copies of crucial documents there. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit under my maiden name for additional records. I set up an offshore account and fed it slowly with money from my hobbies, selling crafts online and occasional consulting work that Richard knew nothing about. Catherine helped me identify the weak points in Richard's business structure, the places where my name on documents would matter most. It's not about taking everything, she advised. It's about positioning yourself so that fighting you would cost him more than settling fairly. Over the years, there were moments when I considered confronting Richard, demanding marriage counseling, or simply filing for divorce. But as Michael grew up, joined the business, and started his own family, I hesitated. I told myself I was protecting our son, preserving his inheritance, maintaining family harmony. The truth was more complicated. Part of me still loved the young man Richard had been. Part of me took pride in the empire we had built together. And part of me, the part one wasn't proud of, wanted to see Richard's face when he realized I had been 10 steps ahead of him all along. Catherine and I met quarterly to review my documentation and strategy. You're building the most comprehensive case I've ever seen, she told me on our 20th anniversary of working together. Most clients can't maintain this level of detail and patience. I had documented every business trip that extended mysteriously, Every late-night meeting that smelled of another woman's perfume. Every dismissive comment about my contributions. Every time Richard took credit for my ideas. I had recordings of business discussions where Richard explicitly acknowledged my role in securing investors or managing properties, save because Michigan was a one-party consent state for recordings. I had built relationships with key tenants, vendors, and business partners, many of whom respected me more than they did Richard. I had quietly registered the copyright to the property management software that Stratford Properties used daily, ensuring that while the company had a perpetual license to use it, I owned the actual intellectual property, and I had waited, patiently, for 25 years. Now, sitting in my chair as darkness fell completely, I pulled out my phone and called Catherine again. "I need to meet first thing tomorrow," I said. "Bring everything. All of it." "All of it?" Catherine sounded surprised. "Evelyn, we've collected a lot over 25 years. "Yes, all of it. Richard gave me 2 weeks to get out of the guest house. That's our timeline now." "I'll have everything ready," Catherine promised. "And Evelyn? After all these years of preparation, how does it feel to finally put the plan in motion?" I thought about Michael's dismissive tone, about Richard's condescending explanation of my generous settlement, about the decades of being underestimated and overlooked. "It feels like justice," I said. The next morning, I arrived at Catherine's office to find 3 large boxes of documents on her conference table. My life's work, in a sense. Not the family I had raised or the home I had created, but the evidence I had gathered, the protection I had built for myself against this very day. "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with the full counterstrike?" Catherine asked as we reviewed the key documents. "We could negotiate a more favorable settlement without revealing everything." "They planned this together, Catherine," I said. "My husband and my son conspired to discard me on the same day, to push me into a retirement home and divide my assets between them. No, I want them to understand exactly who they've been dealing with all these years." Catherine nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Then let's give them an education they'll never forget." 1 week after being served divorce papers, I received a text from Richard. "Meeting with attorneys tomorrow, 2 p.m., Bradford Law Offices. Be on time and bring signed papers." I didn't respond, but I was ready. Catherine had prepared everything, and now it was time for Richard and Michael to learn what I had been preparing for a quarter century. The offices of Bradford Law were located in a gleaming downtown high-rise, all glass and chrome, designed to intimidate with wealth and power. I arrived at 1:55 p.m. wearing a navy blue suit I had purchased specifically for this moment, carrying a leather portfolio containing documents that would change everything. The receptionist led me to a large conference room where Richard and Michael were already seated, along with George Bradford, Richard's longtime attorney. Their faces registered surprise when Catherine walked in behind me. "What's this?" Richard asked, frowning. "I thought you were coming alone, Evelyn." "I mentioned I had an attorney," I replied calmly, taking a seat across from them. "This is Catherine Davis." George Bradford's eyebrows rose slightly at Catherine's name. Her reputation preceded her. "Miss Davis," he said with a nod. "I wasn't aware you were representing Mrs. Stratford." "For quite some time now," Catherine replied pleasantly, arranging her documents on the table. Richard's frown deepened. "This is unnecessary, Evelyn. We have a straightforward agreement ready for your signature. Bringing counsel will only complicate matters and increase expenses." "I think you'll find that matters are already quite complicated, Richard," I said. "Shall we begin?" George Bradford cleared his throat and pushed a document across the table. "This is the dissolution agreement we sent over last week. We've made no changes, as we believe it represents a more than equitable division of assets." Catherine picked up the document, glanced at it briefly, then set it aside. "My client will not be signing this agreement. Instead, we have prepared a counterproposal." She slid a thick document across the table. The first page showed a comprehensive list of properties, businesses, and accounts, with my name highlighted on ownership documents for a surprising number of them. Richard's face drained of color as he scanned the list. "What is this?" "These properties are Stratford Company assets." "Actually," Catherine said, As you can see from the supporting documentation, many of these properties are held in Mrs. Stratford's name, either solely or jointly. The same applies to several of the business entities listed. Michael leaned forward, his expression a mixture of confusion and anger. Dad, what is she talking about? You told me everything was under company control. It was supposed to be, Richard muttered, flipping through the pages with increasing agitation. These were just tax strategies, temporary arrangements. Tax strategies that were never reversed, Catherine noted. Legally binding arrangements that give my client significant ownership, interest in what you've been calling company assets. George Bradford was reviewing the documents with growing concern. Richard, we need to discuss this privately. There's no time for that, Richard snapped. This is ridiculous, Evelyn. You know these arrangements were just paper transactions. You didn't actually contribute to these properties or businesses. Catherine pulled out another folder. Regarding Mrs. Stratford's contributions, we've prepared a detailed accounting of her work over the past 45 years. You'll find it quite comprehensive. The folder contained testimonials from investors who had worked with me, emails where Richard had acknowledged my role in securing deals, photographs of me at construction sites and business meetings, and financial records showing my direct contributions to business accounts. None of this changes anything, Richard insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. The settlement offer stands. I don't think you're understanding the situation, Catherine said. My client isn't asking for a better settlement. She's informing you of what she already legally owns. The conference room door opened and Amanda walked in looking annoyed. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible. What did I miss? No one had told me Amanda would be attending. I felt a flash of anger at this additional ambush, but kept my expression neutral. Michael looked up, his face pale. Mom has an attorney. She's claiming she owns half the business. Not half, Catherine corrected. Based on our documentation, Mrs. Stratford has legal interest in approximately 65% of Stratford Properties' assets. That's impossible, Amanda exclaimed. Richard built that company. With significant assistance from my client, Catherine replied. Assistance that was formalized in numerous legal documents over the years. Amanda turned to Richard. You said this would be simple. You said she'd take the condo and the allowance and be grateful. I looked at my daughter-in-law, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Is that why you were in such a hurry to move your parents into my home, Amanda? So you could start dividing up the spoils? Before Amanda could respond, the door opened again. A courier entered with a large envelope. Delivery for Bradford Law Offices, regarding Stratford Properties. George signed for the package with a puzzled expression. As he opened it, his confusion turned to alarm. Richard, this is a notice regarding the property management software. According to this, the copyright is owned by Evelyn under her maiden name, and the company's license to use it is being reviewed. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. That software runs our entire operation. Yes, it does, I agreed. I helped design it, remember? Back when you thought my computer skills were just a cute hobby. Michael was scrolling frantically through his phone. Dad, I'm getting messages from Harrison and Thompson. They say their ownership agreements are being audited. What's going on? Harrison and Thompson, I said, are two of our largest properties. I believe you'll find my name on those ownership documents as well. The room descended into chaos. Richard was shouting at George about how this could have happened. Michael was trying to call the office to stop whatever audits were underway. Amanda was staring at me with undisguised hatred. Catherine leaned over and whispered, Are you ready for the final revelation? I nodded. She stood, her voice cutting through the noise. If I could have everyone's attention. There's one more matter to address. She pulled out a final document. This is the deed to the guest house property at 1742 Lakeview Drive. Richard waved dismissively. The guest house is part of our main property. Actually, it's not, Catherine said. 5 years ago, Mrs. Stratford discovered that the guest house sits on a separately deeded parcel. With your signature, Richard, she had it transferred solely into her name as a birthday gift. Do you recall signing these papers? Richard's face went from red to white. You said those were routine property tax documents. I believe I said they were important property documents that needed your signature. And they were. I smiled for the first time since entering the room. Which means, Michael, that your plan to move your in-laws into my home is not actually your decision to make. Nor is it Richard's. Michael looked stunned. The guest house is yours? Entirely yours? Yes. Just as many of the other properties and business interests we've discussed today are legally mine, or require my approval to transfer or sell. This is a trick, Amanda hissed. You manipulated documents, took advantage of Richard's trust.
No, Amanda.
I protected myself from exactly this scenario. I watched for 25 years as my contributions were minimized, as decisions were made without me, as I was gradually pushed to the margins of a business and a family I helped build. And I documented everything, just in case this day ever came. Richard had gone very quiet, looking at the mountain of evidence on the table. What do you want, Evelyn? A fair settlement. One that acknowledges what I've built and contributed. Not the insult you tried to give me with your first offer. Catherine slid a new document across the table. This is our proposed settlement agreement. Mrs. Stratford will retain ownership of the guest house property, the Naples condo, the Manhattan apartment, and the Santa Fe retreat. She will maintain her 65% ownership in Stratford properties, but will transfer day-to-day management to Richard and Michael, with certain conditions. George Bradford looked at the settlement terms, his expression grave. Richard, I strongly advise you to consider this offer. Fighting it would be problematic, given the documentation presented. Richard was still in shock. All these years? You were planning this all these years? I was protecting myself. I corrected him. I hoped I'd never need to use any of this. I hoped our marriage and our family meant more to you than business assets to be divided and allocated. I was wrong. Michael looked up from the settlement document, his face a mixture of anger and something else, respect, perhaps? You're not going to force us to sell? You could with this level of ownership. I don't want to destroy what we built, Michael. I just want my fair share and my dignity. The settlement allows the business to continue with you and your father managing it, provided certain conditions are met. What conditions? Amanda demanded. Financial transparency, quarterly reports, my approval for major asset sales or acquisitions, and board positions for several women executives I've identified who have been overlooked for promotion within the company. Richard laughed bitterly. You're remaking my company. Our company, I corrected. And yes, it needs remaking. The way you've run it, valuing only ambition and ruthlessness, overlooking talent and loyalty, it's not sustainable. There was a long silence as they absorbed the full implications of what I was proposing. Finally, Richard spoke. I need time to review this with my attorney. Of course, Catherine said. We'll give you 1 week. After that, if we don't have an agreement, we'll begin exercising Mrs. Stratford's full ownership rights immediately, including her right to remove current management. As Catherine gathered our documents, I stood to leave. Michael caught my eye. Mama, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Michael. Your actions have spoken clearly enough. But I want you to know something. Despite everything, I love you. You're my son. That hasn't changed. What has changed is that I won't be taken for granted or pushed aside anymore. By anyone. Amanda was still seething. This isn't over. We'll fight this. You can try, I said calmly. But before you do, I suggest you read the settlement carefully. Fighting me would cost more than you can imagine financially and otherwise. And Amanda? The guest house is no longer available for your parents. They'll need to find other accommodation when they return from Italy. As Catherine and I walked out of the conference room, I felt lighter than I had in years. The confrontation I had feared for so long was over. And I had survived it. More than survived it. I had prevailed. In the elevator, Catherine squeezed my hand. You were magnificent in there. 25 years of preparation, and you didn't falter once. I had an excellent teacher, I told her. 3 days later, George Bradford called Catherine to accept our settlement terms with minor modifications. Richard and Michael would continue managing Stratford properties, with my oversight. I would retain ownership of the guest house and other personal properties. The financial terms were far more equitable than Richard's original insulting offer. I had won not by taking everything, but by demanding the respect and recognition I deserved. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice long overdue. 6 months after the settlement was signed, I stood on the deck of my new beachfront home in Carmel, watching the waves crash against the shore. The house was smaller than the mansion Richard and I had shared, but it was entirely mine, filled with only the things I loved and the memories I chose to keep. The doorbell rang, announcing Marjorie's arrival. We had planned a weekend of celebration, marking both my new beginning and her retirement from teaching. "This view is spectacular," Marjorie said, joining me on the deck with glasses of wine. "You chose well." "I did, didn't I?" I smiled, looking out at the endless horizon. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life now." "You earned it," Marjorie said firmly. "Every square inch of this house, every moment of this freedom." We settled into comfortable chairs, the late afternoon sun warming our faces. "Have you heard from Richard?" she asked carefully. "His attorney contacts my attorney monthly about business matters. The last I heard, he's struggling a bit with the new arrangement. The board members I appointed keep questioning his decisions, especially the female executives." Marjorie chuckled. "I would pay good money to see his face during those meetings. Apparently he's dating a fitness instructor now, 28 years old." "Of course he is." Marjorie rolled her eyes. "And Michael? Any contact there?" This was the more complicated question. "Some. He calls every few weeks. It's stilted, awkward. He's trying in his way." After the settlement, Michael had gone through several phases. First anger and disbelief, then a period of silence, and finally, tentative attempts at reconciliation. The first time he called, 3 months after everything, his voice had been hesitant. "Mom, it's Michael. I've been thinking about everything. I handled it all wrong. I'm sorry." The apology was imperfect, incomplete, but it was a start. Our conversations since then had been brief but increasingly genuine. Michael was learning slowly to see me as a person in my own right, not just his mother or Richard's wife. "And Amanda?" Marjorie asked, bringing me back to the present. "Still furious," I laughed. "She blames me for everything, including the fact that she and Michael had to downsize from their 5-bedroom house to a 4-bedroom house. Apparently that extra bedroom was essential to her happiness." "What about her parents? Did they ever find a place to stay when they got back from Italy?" "They ended up renting a condo. From what Michael says, they're constantly complaining about it. The kitchen is too small, the neighbors are too noisy. The view isn't what they expected." "Some people are never satisfied," Marjorie observed. "True, but their dissatisfaction is no longer my problem, and that's the most liberating thing of all." In the months since the settlement, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I had reconnected with old friends, joined a local arts council, started teaching accounting workshops for women in financial transitions. I had reclaimed not just my assets but my identity. The business was doing well under the new arrangement. The female executives I had appointed were bringing fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. Quarterly reports showed improved tenant satisfaction and stronger investor relations. Richard and Michael were good at the developmental side of the business, but they had never understood the human element the way I did. "I've decided to establish a trust fund for future grandchildren," I told Marjorie. "With conditions, of course." "Of course," she grinned. "What kind of conditions?" "Educational support regardless of the field they choose. Funds for entrepreneurial ventures that demonstrate social responsibility. Resources for travel and cultural experiences. But nothing that creates the kind of entitlement Michael developed." "Wise," Marjorie nodded. "Speaking of wise decisions, are you going to tell me about Stephen, or do I have to drag it out of you?" I felt my cheeks warm, and not from the sun. "It's early days yet. We've only been on 3 dates." 3 dates in 2 weeks, Marjorie corrected with a knowing smile. "My brother hasn't stopped talking about you." Stephen was Marjorie's younger brother, a retired architect with kind eyes and a gentle humor that made me feel at ease immediately. Our first date had been a simple coffee meeting that turned into a 4-hour conversation. The second, a walk along the beach that ended with dinner at a tiny seafood restaurant. The third, an art exhibition followed by stargazing on this very deck. He's different from Richard, I said. He listens, really listens. And he's interested in me, not what I can do for him. He's smitten, Marjorie said. And from the look on your face, so are you. I laughed, not denying it. At 68, I had not expected to find romance again, but life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayals had been painful, yes, but they had also been catalysts for a transformation I might never have undertaken otherwise. In trying to discard me, Richard and Michael had inadvertently set me free. The next morning, I received a text from Michael asking if he could visit the following weekend. I'd like to talk about some things, he wrote. Important things. I replied with a simple yes, curious but no longer anxious about what he might want. When Michael arrived, he seemed different, humbler somehow. We walked along the beach, the conversation initially about neutral topics, the weather, the local restaurants, the pelicans diving for fish offshore. Then he stopped, turned to face me. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About how I treated you, about the kind of son I've been, the kind of man I've become. I don't like what I see. Growth often starts with uncomfortable realizations, I said. Amanda and I are in counseling, he continued. Things between us. They're not good. She's angry all the time, demanding things I can't provide. I'm starting to see patterns that remind me of Dad. I listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or judgments. This was Michael's journey, and he needed to find his own way through it. I keep thinking about what you said that day in the attorney's office. About loving me despite everything. Did you mean that? I did, I said softly. Ido. You're my son, Michael. That doesn't change, even when you hurt me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not, I agreed. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to release the anger, not for the other person's sake, but for your own. We continued walking, the silence between us more comfortable now. I'd like to try again, Michael said finally. To be the kind of son you deserve. I don't know if I can, but I want to try. I'd like that, I told him. But Michael, understands something. I'm not the same person I was. I won't be taken for granted again. Not by anyone. I have boundaries now, and I'll enforce them. I understand, he nodded. It's one of the things I admire about you now. Your strength. I just wish I had seen it sooner. As we turned back toward the house, I felt a sense of cautious hope. The relationship between us would never be the same, but perhaps it could be something new, something built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Later that evening, after Michael had gone, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the stars emerge over the ocean. I thought about the journey of the past 6 months, of the previous 25 years of my entire life. I had spent so long being someone's wife, someone's mother, supporting others' dreams while setting my own aside. Now, at 68, I was finally the protagonist of my own story. Not just surviving, but thriving. Building a life of my own design. Filled with people who valued me for exactly who I was. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating had actually been my liberation. In trying to discard me, Richard and Michael had inadvertently set me free to become the woman I was always meant to be. And that woman was just getting started. Would you share in the comments if you've ever had to reinvent yourself after a major life change? Have you experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something better? I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and transformation. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and create the life you deserve. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when life challenges you.